Hello and welcome to episode 3 of This Much is True Crime. Crime families have been around for centuries, starting with the Cosa Nostra, the Italian mafia, originally from Sicily and spreading its tentacles to New Orleans and New York. They're still active, but less high profile. In Britain and Ireland, though, we have our own modern mafia. Where big cities have docks, then you'll find them dangerous and deadly, and now portrayed on television, in film, and on streamers. And so join me, Martin Frizell, and Professor David Wilson, as we explore the bloodlust of the blood relatives. When we talk about crime families, I always think of The Godfather. Of the 3 films, which was your favourite? I know what you're going to say, but which was your favourite?
The original.
Oh, really?
I like the original, but I accept that the number 2 is the best of, everybody will talk about how a remake, or not a remake, in the sequence, number 2 of The Godfather is always there, is always brought up at this point. But I actually liked the beginning of it. I like that kind of origin story. I've always found that more appealing than the actual crimes themselves and how it works out.
I mean, I just love number 2 with Al Pacino. I just love the Lake Tahoe, the whole kind of wedding scene. It just looked so opulent. And also I found there's quite a bit of humor in it as well. But also it's kind of, jaw-dropping. I know 1 was violent, but it was jaw-dropping in terms of just seeing some of the violence that came through on 2. But I thought it was a nicer movie to watch. The narrative was better. But of course, all 3 are based on, was it the 5 families of New York who were the initial mafia families from Sicily?
There were 5 originally from Sicily, and obviously we associate the mafia with Sicily, so to this day. And
but it's from peasants. So again, when you read through it, the mafioso, almost from medieval times, and certainly in Sicily, it was peasants who, with their own endeavors, formed almost like protection rackets for their friends, for their neighbors, and that grew into, they would then protect the neighbors themselves who had to pay for it. And Sicily seemed to be the place where it just all spawned. And then, of course, during the 1800s, they moved to New York and New Orleans, where they carry on.
And that's one tradition of the organized crime group, the crime family. That's one of the traditions where it comes from. But of course, every country, every part of Europe will have its own origin story of how these crime families develop. And what seems to link them all, though, Martin, is that they come from very traditional working class areas that have fallen on hard times. And a lot of the people that become the heads of these organized crime families are real innovators, real entrepreneurs. And you do feel sometimes, if only they had used their talents and applied them in a legitimate way, they wouldn't have needed to turn to crime in the first place. But the whole thing about crime family doesn't quite capture, I think, what we're dealing with today, because so often there's because of the romance almost of the mafia, there's a belief that these groups are based on blood ties, whereas they're not. Often they're not family ties at all. They're territorial ties. They're a loose amalgamation of people who get together. And although we kind of talk about crime families, it's that kind of loose amalgamation that's the preferred model, I think, in Britain, as opposed to New York, as opposed to...
I suppose it's just another way of saying gang.
Yeah.
Literally, it's just another word. It's not, it's my brother, it's my cousins. I mean, that will be part of it. But, it's these people, a bit like, we're kind of doing this because we're both fans of the BBC series, This City Is Ours.
Which is a wonderful series set in Liverpool. You can still catch all episodes on the BBC app. I thought it was great because it was, a kind of rebranding of Liverpool and a rebranding of the crime family drama. And I really thought it hasn't been given the kind of credit it deserves. Lucy Mangan in The Guardian absolutely hated it, called it derivative. But Lucy Mangan doesn't seem to like any crime drama or true crime documentary. But yeah, I think it's a really great series. And of course, that, in a sense, is based on the kind of it's a crime family, and who's going to inherit from the father, who, spoiler alert, is going to die very early on in the series, who's going to inherit his crown. But also you begin to see, well, what kind of entrepreneurship have they got? How do they make connections abroad? Why do those connections trust them to deliver the money that they need to be paid?
Yeah, and I mean, in Liverpool, because I presume it's the docks. I mean, these, it just suits these families that they just happen to be there, where I presume a lot of their drugs, whatever they're bringing into the country, comes through there. So they are close to it. So imagine cities where you'll find big docks like that, trading going through. You'll have families similar to that.
That's absolutely right. And of course, you started our conversation talking about the mafia, and the Liverpool mafia of the 1970s, based on the activities of somebody that used to be an armed robber, Tommy Comerford. It was him really in the 1970s that begins the organized crime network in Liverpool that's going to deal in drugs in Britain, which he's importing from abroad because of the closeness to the docks. And what Comerford did that was very clever is that he brokers a deal in the 1970s with some of the young black gangs in Toxteth, and that allows them to really take over the drugs industry in Liverpool. Comerford died, and now, of course, we'd associate a lot of the organised crime in Liverpool with a guy called Curtis Warren. But Comerford was the beginning of the Liverpool mafia.
And they, of course, move international. So it seems to be Holland, Amsterdam, and the Costa del Sol, Costa del Crime, is where they've moved into. How, again, is that just moving stuff through Liverpool, across the country, again on ferries to the Netherlands, or is the drug coming into the Netherlands, or is it coming across from North Africa into Spain? Again, are they all just very smart people? They're choosing, where they set up for access to the drugs.
That's absolutely right. And it changes because they are very clever people, and because ultimately the police, the law enforcement, is in a kind of hare and tortoise race with organized crime groups.
Well, this is the big question. Are they turning a blind eye to some of it? Does it suit them that the organized crime groups just, get on with their own business, as long as it's not, spilling out into open warfare in the streets? Do they turn just a blind eye to it?
I don't think they turn a blind eye to it because it's so costly. The National Crime Agency has calculated that there are something like 7,500 organised crime groups operating in the United Kingdom at a cost of £100 million to the Exchequer per day. So there's a lot of money there, and the police would want to shut down their activities if they were able. I think what it suggests is that there are a variety of ways that an organized crime group, if they're sensible about how they behave, can manage their relationship with the formal agents of law and order. If they can kind of keep below the radar for long enough and diversify. I mean, you were mentioning the Costa del Sol in Amsterdam. I mean, those are still places that are relatively popular in terms of drama. But crime has moved on. The drugs trade has moved on. There's still a lot of drugs that come in through Africa, through Spain, and then into Northern Europe. But a lot of the people that one would associate with organized crime groups don't go to the Costa del Sol, the Costa del Crime anymore. They go to Dubai. Things are developing. These are criminal entrepreneurs, innovators. So they're always going to be trying to be one step ahead of where law enforcement is going to be in terms of tracking them down.
And whether it's drama or whether it's real life, the violence that a lot of these crime families are responsible for, you would think surely the police can get a handle on that. But then I remember that dreadful case of Olivia Pratt-Corbell.
Oh, yes.
In Liverpool just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Where Thomas Cashman, the gunman, was chasing, I think it's Joseph Nee. Obviously, drug war between families.
Yeah.
He's chasing him through this district of Liverpool. And Nee runs into a house tries to escape in a house. And that's when Cashman fires shots that hit the mother of Olivia in the hand, but kill Olivia herself. She's only 9 years old, and Cashman's serving 42 years for it now. But it was the conspiracy of silence after that. You know, someone has shot a child dead in Liverpool, and it was several days before they finally were able to get Cashman because everyone just closed down.
But ultimately, Cashman gets arrested, and that's...
Well, the name was going around, but actually pinning it down on him, you know, took a while.
I accept that. But what was for me interesting is that's when the police really do begin to take notice. That organized crime wasn't fighting its own turf war against other people that might be rivals in that turf war. They were involving members of...
But that's what I'm saying. That's when I say turning a blind eye. I mean, that's what I'm meaning. You know, normally you get on with it. We get on with what we're doing. You kill a child, then all bets are off.
For me, I became interested in crime families, organized crime groups, because I became, as you know, my expertise is on violent crime, and I was doing research on contract killing. I was doing research about hitmen, and I became obsessed about the murder of Frank McPhee in Mary Hill in Glasgow. And there is a link between Frank McPhee's death in Glasgow and the crime gang, the crime family war between the Daniels and the Lyons in Glasgow. And Jamie Daniels has always been linked to the murder of Frank McPhee. And what really surprised me when I went to where Frank McPhee was shot, which was outside his house, that was literally a quarter of a mile away from the Maryhill police station. You saw Maryhill police station from the front door of Frank McPhee, and they have still never arrested anyone in relation to Frank McPhee's murder. And so violence, especially lethal violence, is part and parcel of what all the crime families, all the organized crime groups will be prepared to use should that be necessary. And
it's not just on other crime groups, other gangs, other families. It's within the families themselves as well, which I didn't realize. And This City Is Ours kinds of shows, well, it does show definitely. They're prepared even to kill each other, you know, when relations break down.
I mean, we're rightly mentioning This City Is Ours, which is the BBC drama, but there's a wonderful BBC documentary at the moment about the Kinahans.
I've seen that.
You know, what an amazing documentary series out of BBC Northern Ireland, I think, but based on the Kinahans, who are Dublin-based. And you see within that documentary how people who were supposedly in an alliance with one another, how very quickly things can change, how they would be prepared to turn on one another should it be necessary to protect themselves. And I suppose, you know, I don't want to glamorize these guys, but for me, what the Kinahan documentary did was show this kind of extraordinary ability to be innovative and entrepreneurial, and a desperate desire to be legitimate. You know, they want legitimately to hold the public's attention. And I just kind of always feel when talking to these people, as I've sometimes done after they've been arrested, you know, if only they could have used their talents in another way, they would have got to where they wanted to go to anyway.
And looking at the Kinahans and the empire, because that's the word for it, the empire that they've created.
Yeah.
I think to myself, Dublin especially, how many people in Dublin are on drugs? Because they made so much money out of just that one city. Now, I've been to Dublin a few times. I don't see people off their head all the time on drugs. I mean, really, could Dublin actually sort of provide that kind of living, that kind of base for a crime family?
Well, there...
Of course, I've seen Kin as well, which again is not based on true events, or so the author says. And I do wonder sometimes, is that because he doesn't want to be associated with them? But Kin is another fascinating sort of, you know, snapshot of Dublin crime, Dublin drugs. I'm just astonished that Dublin, you know, has this capacity to, you know, to take all those drugs in.
Well, and it doesn't. It can't, because as you say, there's a limited number of people. So what you see is that an ability for some of these organized criminal groups, organized criminal families to trade in other territories. So Dublin has a very close relationship with Liverpool. Dublin has a very close relationship with Amsterdam. There are various places where they can develop the trade. And when I first started looking at hitmen, contract killers, the youth of lethal violence, it was quite clear that a lot of the first wave of hitmen that were active on mainland Britain had come from Dublin and Belfast. And so there was a kind of it showed where these international connections were. But ultimately, if you've got a product, you want to sell that product. And once you've saturated one area, you've got to go to another area to keep the product developing in relation to the amount of money that you can make.
How prolific would you say these crime families are to this day?
Without doubt. I mean, we've been talking about the Lyons and the Daniels in Glasgow. There was no...
And these are decades-long feuds.
And there was an arrest. Somebody only got sent down last month for a murder that's connected to the Lyons and Daniels family. We've talked about them. We've talked about Liverpool. We could talk about the Noonans in Manchester. Every single city in the United Kingdom will have families who have developed a reputation for being the criminal entrepreneurs of that area. And that figure is an astonishing one that I've said earlier. The National Crime Agency came up with 7,500 active organized crime groups in this country, some of which will be based on familial blood ties, most of which will not be.
And do we have to worry about them regularly as we go about our daily business? I mean, are they as kind of, thick as thieves, honor amongst thieves? They keep to themselves, apart from obviously Cashman killing young Olivia. Would I ever know that I was rubbing up against kind of shoulders with these people? Would I ever see what they do as such? Or literally, it's almost like a closed shop. It's their business. And unless you actually upset or interfere with them, you wouldn't know they were operating.
No, and I think that's right. You wouldn't know unless you were up close and personal that this person was making money through behaving in this particular way. But then on the other hand, we shouldn't ignore the fact that if there are 7,500 organized crime groups operating in the United Kingdom, that there will be a significant number of people who will be suspicious of how so-and-so makes their money. Why are they driving that car? How come they're able to afford this kind of lifestyle? There will clearly be people who should not have the kind of conspicuous consumption that they have, but nonetheless they do. That's when you begin to question, well, how is this person making that cash?
And how do they launder this money?
Well, a variety of ways. I mean, the trick is to make the money clean, isn't it? That's why it's laundered. And we know some of the ways that will be done on the high street through various shops, nail bars, barber shops. We know about casinos, horse racing. There will be lots of ways of trying to clean the money. But significantly, a lot of these guys get caught ultimately because they're storing the money in their house. They're storing some of the drugs in their house. They're storing, they rent a place, a property, and they put all their ill-gotten gains in that property. There's a kind of, we imagine it's all going to be laundered in this very particular way, but in fact, often it's really kind of amateur at that level.
You alluded to it earlier on, so Costa crime, the cities themselves that we know of, may be a thing of the past now, because you're saying Dubai is an interesting location for these people. Why do they pick there?
It's glamorous, it's hot, they can live a lifestyle. Nobody questions their lifestyle in Dubai because Dubai is a very wealthy area, and therefore...
So everyone drives Ferraris.
Everybody has a Ferrari. So driving a Ferrari in certain parts of Manchester or Glasgow is going to draw attention to yourself. It's not going to draw attention to yourself in Dubai. There are issues in relation to extradition out of Dubai. So there's a sense in which that was why the Costa del Sol was so popular at one stage. There was no extradition treaty for a number of years,
But there is now.
but there is now. So therefore, people who go there who've committed crime in London can be or the United Kingdom can be extradited back to the country. Dubai's a bit more loosey-goosey in relation to some of those things. And that's where we think a lot of the people who are currently on the UK's most wanted list are actually staying.
And how do they communicate? How do they run their businesses from Dubai? I mean, I presume it's emails, it's phones. I mean, is it the dark web? You would think, and maybe, the authorities, the police in this country, are they investing enough into cyber security, checking these people, pulling them up because of that? But then I suppose if they do, what you're saying is they can't get them.
That's right. So they're doing all of the things that you've suggested. And I mean, I mentioned contract killing. There are a number of law enforcement personnel on the dark web pretending to be contract killers to see who's coming forward to try and engage their services so that they can catch the people who are commissioning the hits. And that's how, indeed, a lot of the Irish contract killing got caught, was because their use of the dark web. The police pose on the dark web as contract killers. But yeah, they're using all of those methods. The key thing is, keep thinking of this as a hare and a tortoise race. The hare are the organized crime groups and the tortoise, law enforcement. Eventually, the tortoise is going to catch up with the hare, so the hare moves into something else, changes their behavior.
And so we're never going to say goodbye to crime families, are we? They're always going to be here. As long as there's money to be made and people prepared to pay for it, under the counter, cash, whatever it is, they're always going to be here.
Well, that's about where do these crime families emerge from? They emerge from what
poverty
in the 1950s are called traditional working class white areas of the cities, which increasingly from the 1970s into the 1980s were pretty deprived. These were guys that emerge as criminal innovators, entrepreneurs within that environment. They had the same goals as the yuppies in London. They wanted the Porsches, the Lamborghinis. They wanted to make money. They wanted to have conspicuous consumption. They couldn't do it by selling stocks and shares, but they could do it through selling drugs.
But now as well, they're using social media as almost like a marketing tool. They're on TikTok, sort of boasting of hits they've made or of money they've made or the lifestyle they have. So, I mean, we know how influenced youngsters can be these days. So that's just a new way of them saying, hey, come and join the party.
Absolutely. And it's also a way of diluting what they're doing at the end of the day, because what they're doing at the end of the day is committing crime and often using the threat or the actuality of violence to maintain their market. And they want to kind of whitewash that, don't they? They want to make that seem a much more glamorous, noble calling. And their use of social media is one of the ways in which they do that. I mean, I don't know if you've been reading some of these guys, but some of their names are extraordinary, aren't they? You end up going, my gosh, what's this guy called? Why have they got these nicknames?
They've got a good sense of humor.
Yeah.
I mean, again, just watching, and we'll just finish by, I would recommend absolutely anybody who wants to sort of, get into it, because I think from what you've been saying, what I've been looking at as well, they are very realistic. So this city is ours and kin, although not deliberately, based exactly on families of very similar names to it. They're very true to form.
Absolutely. And you've mentioned two dramas there, Kin and This City Is Ours. But if you want to see a documentary about an organized crime group, criminal family, look at Kinahan, which is also on the BBC app iPlayer.
Well, thank you for that, David. That's the end of this episode. Next time we're talking Natalia Grace, aren't we?
Oh, what a story!
Which is Good American Family, which is the young girl, or was she? We'll leave that till next time.
No spoilers.